Okay. Here's the basic definition of elasticity of demand. Okay. It's there's a formula, and there's also the words. So you're going to get some variation on this, and maybe even be asked for this. So let's look at this together here. An elastic demand is one in which the change in quantity demanded due to a change in price is large. An inelastic demand is one in which a change in quantity demanded due to a change in price is small. So there's essentially two like competing ideas here. It's like, what happens as you change price? Do you get a really big change in demand, or do you get a really little change in demand? Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the main like difference between them. Now there's also this formula here that you may or may not need. Do you get a note sheet with this?
No, I do not.
Okay. So probably not going to be asked to calculate things. But these are this is the formula here. So do you recall things that are, elastic versus inelastic in terms of like things that you, do you remember anything from class about something that might be elastic versus inelastic?
Yes, a little bit. So like elastic things are more susceptible to change based on the demand of how much you want it.
Okay.
While inelastic demand is more like, this is just going to happen because this stays the same no matter how many people demand a different thing.
Okay. So I'm gonna give you two things, automobile, and I'll just broadly say groceries. Which of these would be considered elastic and which would be considered inelastic? Based on what you just told me. What you told me is correct, but let's talk about it. And what I'm trying to give you here is an example of something you don't buy very often and stuff you buy all the time.
I think groceries are more elastic while automobiles are inelastic.
Yeah, and that's why I want to go through this, because it's easy to misrepresent these elastic versus inelastic. So the elastic demand is one in which the change in quantity demanded due to a change in price is large. And the idea here is that they're purchased infrequently.
Oh, okay.
Whereas these are purchased frequently. And I personally, like, I don't think some of these things are intuitive. So that's why I have to always go back to the definitions. Like I always look these up because I don't feel like the words necessarily mean the thing that I think it means. But somehow you've got to convey elastic, infrequent, inelastic, frequent. I don't think you need the formula for this because you probably will not be asked to do a calculation given the way that you said the exam was stated, but that's something we can. So I think you will get a question, something like, is this an elastic good or an inelastic good? And these are the kinds of things that you want to think about when you're looking.
Right. Okay.
All right. We talked a little bit about positive and negative externalities. Do you think we need to spend any time reviewing that, or can I go on to another topic?
You can move on. I feel
Okay.
like that's
Okay. So let's next talk about perfect competition versus monopolies. Could you in any way describe the differences, any differences or any similarities between those two?
Monopolies are they're both inefficient.
So
No.
perfect competition, I mean, that's ideal. Like that's why it's perfect, if you will.
Right.
They have okay, and I can be more specific. I'm just trying to see, like, what do you remember versus like, hey, Matthew's got to tell you everything you should remember on these. But there's a couple of different ways we can go. Is there anything you remember about kind of key differences or key, descriptors of one versus the other.
Perfect competition is more price makers, while monopolies are price takers.
Okay.
So,
What do you mean by that? What's the difference between a price maker and a price taker?
um, price makers are uh price makers have an influence on the demand. So price makers or price takers will cause the demand to be either negative or positive.
Okay.
I think.
So you mentioned that a monopoly is a consumer is a price taker and under a monopoly. I think that's what you said. Is that so?
Yes.
So for example, in where we live, you get there's only one natural gas provider, one electric provider. There's certain classes of monopolies, but like you and I don't get a choice. And I know you're not paying the bill for that, but you and I don't get a choice. Like bill comes in, we pay it. Like it's whatever it is, right? What's an example of a good that would be considered more of perfect competition? What's something that you buy or your family buys that you could say, yeah, that's a perfect competition situation.
Um, Maybe I don't know, pencils.
Okay, how about streaming services?
Oh yeah, that too.
I mean, you just mentioned you're interested in watching something. There's, I mean, how many streaming services are there out there? I mean, there's a lot. There's uh, Netflix, there's Hulu, there's Paramount, there's Peacock, there's I don't know, what am I missing? HBO, Amazon. There's like a million. There's a lot of these, right?
Yeah.
Now I don't know if it's perfect competition, but the point is that there's under perfect competition you have a large number of sellers and there's easy access into the market. Like you and I, if we wanted to go and start a streaming company, could we do that?
No,
Why not?
because there's too much competition that it wouldn't be beneficial for us.
Well, okay, so I guess so. Yeah, that's true. I mean, like you and I wouldn't start a streaming service, but maybe we could make some. I mean, could we start a hot dog stand somewhere?
Oh, yeah,
Sure, right? Like we can do that. It's easy, and meaning like there's not a barrier. It's not like if you and I wanted to start a natural gas company, we would have no shot at doing that.
right.
Utilities are a great example of things that are sort of monopolies because I mean, look, you can't just have anybody digging for natural gas or it creates some problems. Um, Now the monopolies generally have one seller. That's the big kind of thing to remember about a monopoly. There's only one person. They make the price and you take the price. Now, if you and I start a hot dog stand and we charge $10 for a hot dog, do you think people are going to want to buy at that price?
$10 a hot dog?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, we can make it up all day long and they're going to say, nope, we're going to go down to what's that Wiener Schnitzel, right? You get five for like $7.
Yeah.
It used to be like five for like $2 or something. It used to be something so you can't even believe how cheap it was, and probably even cheaper, even further back. But yeah, like people are not going to just take your price. They're going to say, no, the market says it should be this. Have you ever tried to sell anything like online, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, anything like that, eBay maybe? You ever tried to sell anything?
Not online, no.
Okay.
I did sell chocolate at school
Okay.
and I sold a lot.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. I mean, that's important to kind of get those experiences. Now at school, your competition, maybe you don't have any, but if you were to go out into the marketplace, you couldn't just sell your chocolate bars for any old price. You'd have to be consistent with what people expect to pay. Um,
Right.
so there's a few other things we can talk about like MRs and MCs and all that, but let's keep it high level here for a moment. Do you remember an oligopoly? Because it's much
Oh,
closer to a monopoly. Do you remember what that is?
it's like worse. And I mean, I do remember that.
Okay, so fuel or gas is kind of a big one that most people think of. OPEC, they're the oil
Oh yeah.
producing countries in the Middle East. They're much closer to a monopoly than anything else, but they
Isn't
they
an old isn't an oligopoly more like a cartel, so everything's done on the inside and everything's like
yes, yes. Okay, so like let's say you and I had an oligopoly of hot dog stands, and we were the only ones that could produce hot dog stands. That's ridiculous, but let's just say if I change the price on my side, you would have to change the price on your side,
right.
and you don't get a chance to, like, you have to do it. You are, and I use this word collusion. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but you're where everyone's in agreement. That is what's gonna happen.
Right. Okay.
And so in the case of OPEC, you will see this occasionally on the news, that they've cut supply. The number of barrels being produced has reduced, and we're not going to get into the politics of why or what, but the idea is that, like, they set a price and we take it, or the buyer takes it. They, again, just like a monopoly, they make it and we take it. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's hard to get into because we can't just start pumping oil, even though it's the same earth. Everybody's pumping into the same earth, but they're over there and we're over here. Like, we can't just tap into their oil resources. Um, any questions on
Yeah.
that?
No.
So you want to have some broad understanding of each of these, because then it gets into, like, well, scenarios like if company A is a monopoly, how would they do something? And you want to think of it from the perspective of something you maybe already know, which I understand is hard, because you don't really buy goods and services in the economy we live in quite yet. You're right on the edge. They would call it, you're living, there's this thing called the exosystem, which is this world outside of the world you live in, until you start interacting with it. Like, the economy is actually more like an exosystem to you at this point, but you will interact with it, and you will have kind of the same issues we all have, which is, like, you get your natural gas or electric bill and it's just whatever it is. There's no way around it. The internet's kind of an interesting one. It used to be more of a monopoly, but with all the cell phone companies now offering hotspots, it's a little bit more competitive than it once was. But generally, like, you're kind of stuck. Services are sort of stuck in one place or another.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about supply and demand. I assume that's going to be on here. Is
I
that
assume
reason?
so too. Yeah. That
Okay,
would make sense.
what is going on here? I thought I had something pulled up. Give me just a moment. What was on this other screen? Okay. So there's this really important distinction that's made, at least in most of the classes I've ever seen, which is a shift of the curve and a movement along the curve. Do you remember hearing that, or talking about that in class?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, shifting the curve itself versus moving along the curve. So,
Yes, I do
like
remember that.
okay, can you tell me anything about that, or
Um, well, moving along the demand curve would be like a change in price, while a shift in the demand curve would be a change in quantity or a change in quantity or a change in wage, I believe.
okay? Yeah, so the price is the big deal because the price literally changes.
Right.
So sometimes, in really awful multiple choices, they actually give you, like, shift along, shift of, and they give you all the directions, and you got to be really, really careful
Which
about
one?
which one it is. So, uh, is it an upward or a downward movement? Things like that. So can you give me can can you give me, let's see, I guess I got to pose the example here. I don't like coming because I don't know what they're going to come up with in your class. But for any goods and service, there's this equilibrium price and quantity, if you will. I mean, there's that's always there. And this could change. So I guess I've got to give you and I guess is the hot dog example okay, or do you want something else? A hot dog stand?
The hot dogs is funny, so I'm gonna keep it.
Okay, let's keep it in mind here. All right. So what would cause the supply of hot dog stands? What would cause this curve to shift out to the right? Can you
What
think of
would cause
something?
it to?
Yeah,
Maybe a change in the supply curve, right? Not demand.
supply curve. I'm asking, yeah, supply curve moves to the right. What would cause, you know, just give me any
Um,
reason you can think of. We'll just start there.
Price would go down, causing supply to shift to the right.
But you said price movements are along the curve.
Along the demand curve.
Okay, let's just focus on supply. What would cause, because we'll get to demand.
Oh,
So let's say
oh,
uh
an increase in quantity for the supply curve would cause the curve to shift to the right.
yes, but what I'm trying to get you to tell me is like something that would cause it. Like for example, let's say let's say that city of Tucson made uh it more beneficial to sell hot dogs. There's no longer a hot dog tax, something ridiculous like that. Like why would that why would that make people want to, I mean, that would essentially cause people to want to move here to sell hot dogs, increasing the supply.
Decreasing?
Increasing. Like if there's no longer, okay, let's use a different example. Let's say the price of buns decreased.
Mhm.
Why would that cause the supply to increase?
Uh, if buns decrease?
Yeah, so every hot dog's, you need a hot dog bun to go with it. It makes, okay, so this, we're not getting, let's focus on demand.
No, wait. If buns decrease, then that would mean the supply shifts to the left because they're running out of materials to make the.
No, the price went down. Let's focus on demand. Let's focus on demand. Demand for hot dogs in Tucson. What is something that makes a person want more hot dogs, not having nothing to do with price? Can you think of anything like that would help cause you and I to want more hot dogs?
Um, Maybe a decrease in price so that.
It can't talk about price. So okay, let me try this again.
Wait.
I'm trying, I realize how difficult this is to understand and explain. So let's talk about something negative for a moment. Let's say someone writes an article that says that hot dogs make you fat.
No.
So someone writes a really bad article. They say hot dogs make you fat. We don't know if it's true or false. That's the article. You read it, you're like, oh, I don't want hot dogs anymore. So the demand shifts left. It has nothing to do with price,
It's because society doesn't want hot dogs anymore.
right? Because they're bad. They're bad for you. Something that says they're bad for you, you're like, oh, I don't want a hot dog anymore. Or if it said they make you sick or they're linked to cancer or something really negative, right?
Right.
Now here's something positive. Let's say there's more outdoor birthday parties.
Oh, fun.
Okay, so you have more birthday parties, and more people going to parks, more people grilling. What do you grill? Hamburgers and hot dogs. There's a little bit of like, you have to remember these things that maybe if you're not out in the real world, like, oh, more birthday parties means more barbecues, means more hot dogs. So that would cause the demand to go out to the right.
Okay.
I feel like this is the first time you're hearing this. Is this maybe not being covered, or is this just you just haven't seen this in a while and it's just totally foreign to you?
I I know what you're talking about, but it's been a while.
Okay. So the idea is that there's things that either move it left or right, and it depends on whether it's from the demand side or the supply side.
Right.
And
Okay.
demand means like you and I, like, do we want this thing? Does the consumer want this thing? Like, why do they want more hot dogs? So you
Right.
could and it's not just the article. Like if you wrote an article that said like hot dogs are good for you, then all of a sudden demand's going to shift to the right.
Right.
Now, and if all the parks in Tucson closed because they are renovating them or something, then demand would move left because people aren't going to be barbecuing as much.
Right.
Now you try, what you have to do is not overthink these things. You can't be like, well, if people aren't going to go to parks, they're just going to have them at home. Like they're trying to tell you something in the language they're using. They're trying to say like, look, assume normal society, normal rules, which may be weird to consider, but you can't like try to rationalize something else. You have to say, okay, what are they trying to make me understand here?
Right.
Like, is it a positive thing or a negative thing for this? And that's how you um, kind of work through it. And it's the same for the supply side, but you do them one at a time. You're like, all right, this is a demand situation, meaning a consumer side thing. And there's other things here as well that would potentially affect demand. And one of them, what I was getting to is like what are called substitutes or complements.
So okay, yeah.
Have you talked about those? Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Sorry, you kind of cut out.
Yeah, I apologize. I noticed my internet just dropped slightly. Let me know if you can hear me now. We're good.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk like there's other things that do affect these goods that aren't necessarily like a lot of people think that hot dogs go with hamburgers, right? So if you found out that hamburgers they went way up in price, hamburgers now super expensive, okay? And we know that hey, I'll either have a hamburger or a hot dog, like they're close
There's
substitutes.
substitutes.
And you're like, well, I'll just have the hot dog because it's cheaper. Okay, but what you really are saying is your demand for it has gone up. Your demand for it has gone up because you're like, hey, I could go for one or the other, hamburger or hot dog, doesn't matter to me.
Right.
And okay, well, I guess I'll demand more hot dogs now because hamburgers are too expensive.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay, and that's where I was going with the some other things like what's so most people think like ketchup and mustard, they're kind of the normal thing to throw on a hot dog. You know, these are normal generalities. So like, what if the price of ketchup and mustard went way up? Well, you need those on a hot dog. Like you wouldn't eat a hot dog without ketchup and mustard is the point. So sometimes they do these things like peanut butter and jelly. They're complements with each other. So you
Right.
have to look at it from that perspective. Like, well, if ketchup and mustard are really expensive now, I don't want a hot dog anymore because I need those on it. And if they're too expensive, I'm just not gonna have one. And that would cause demand to shift left.
Right. Okay.
And you got to be careful. You can't be like, well, then I would buy more hamburgers. But maybe, but that's not the point here. The point here isn't that.
Right. The point
It
is the
you
hot
got
dogs.
the hot dogs. Yeah, you got to kind of limit all that discussion. Okay, so now we can do the same thing with supply. You know, what would cause supply to decrease? So they often use, and I'll just use the typical example. They'll say like uh, a warehouse fire caused the shutdown of the hot dog plants. what does that mean for supply if the warehouse is shut down or there was a fire?
Um, there'd be less. There'd be
There'd be less.
Yeah, there'd be a decrease in supply because
Yeah,
there's less hot dogs.
less hot dogs, right? Like that's how you have to look at it. Like whatever they're talking about, like does this cause less to be available? Like it doesn't matter whether you want more or less. It just means like are there less available?
Right.
Okay. So like I don't want to get into like what are in hot dogs because I don't that's a different class altogether. But imagine hot dogs were grown for the moment, and there's now a new technique for growing hot dogs that's more efficient.
Okay.
Basically, it's a technology thing.
Mm,
So what happens to the supply? Well, it moves to the right because they're now easier and cheaper to make. And the assumption is you would make more, or a person would make more, but you don't want to look at it from that perspective. You just want to look at it from like, does it make it so that there's more that can be produced?
right. Okay.
So technology pushes out the supply curve.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So I mean, I hate asking like these sort of really basic questions, but like there are some that are like you get to these exams and you know you've spent so much time studying these problems that you forget. I'm about to
The
snip
easy
this in.
stuff.
The easy stuff, which is like, all right, what are the three basic questions all economic systems must answer? What to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So these are the kinds of things that you know you don't want to miss, but that they're not complicated. What to produce, how, and for whom. There's that production possibilities curve.
Right.
And so you want to be on the curve when you produce. All the textbooks I had growing up were like guns and butter. I don't know if they still do that. They
Yeah,
may not.
actually they do.
They do. Okay. And then sometimes they say, well, what's going on over here at point E and what's going on over here at point D? These are A, B, and C. So you might get a question like, what's going on at E? And the answer is this is not possible.
Right. It's not possible.
But what could make it possible
And,
is a technology shift, right? Like we just talked about.
right.
But what's going on at D?
D is possible, but it's inefficient. So they're
Inefficient.
making less than they should be.
Yes. Very good. So that they often talk about then resources. And there's like variations on how you answer this, but let me snip this in. The question could be as simple as like, well, what are the resources? I always thought of it as land, labor, and capital.
Yeah, that's how we were taught in class.
But you can see there's tons of material on this. There's variations on this. Okay, and the big point of this is that all of this leads to trade,
Right.
and hopefully you
Trade
talked about
is,
that at some point.
yes, trade is
So
a big thing.
why would you trade? You know, why would Joaquin want to trade something?
Um, Trading could be good for like compliments, right? Or no?
Well, the idea is like, let's say you were on an island economy or on an island, just as an example. You lived on an island
Oh,
and
awesome.
there's only so much that you can do. You have, and maybe like you have coconuts on that island. Like, and you're like, all right, I love coconuts. But one day you get tired of coconuts and you're like, all right, like a warm sweater because it's getting cold. And you don't have any ability to make that warm sweater because you've been making coconuts, you know, for the last 30 days. So the trade works in the way that you can get goods and services cheaper than it would be for you to make them on your own.
Hmm.
And so everything leads to trade. So there's two types of advantages that you'll see. There's the the comparative advantage, and the
Okay.
absolute advantage. Do you remember?
The
Do you remember the difference
the
between those?
absolute advantage is like when you have a control over both the supply and demand in a market, while the comparative advantage is where you have control more of a control over like one or the other than a different market, right?
Some of that might be true. They generally refer to it in as like two goods. Like you can make, like compared to me, you can make more than I can. That's the absolute. Like who can make the most? It's
Mm,
usually like a one for one comparison. And it's the same product. So like if you produce, we can pick anything, soccer balls. You make more soccer balls than I do. You have an absolute advantage in that. The absolute just means which one makes more. Now the comparative one's the more interesting one. It's the fact that you're having to choose between the two goods and which one are you going to make and why, and that's where it gets more complicated. Um,
mm.
so what I would tell you is to think like know one, and then the other comes as a derivative of it. Like, do you have an absolute advantage means do you make more? Comparative is like which is the more efficient one for you to make.
Right. Okay.
So you see this and you see this more in other countries. The United States is a pretty good country in terms of trade, even though we've got some issues. But what I mean is like we can make a lot of things we need, but there's countries. Did you watch the World Cup?
Yes.
Okay, so Qatar, they make they export oil and natural gas. Like they're really good at that. Okay, they don't, but they need clothing and they need agriculture and they need building supplies. Like they need a lot of stuff. That's why they trade. Like even though they have something everybody else wants, they also need stuff in return, and the trade is beneficial for everyone involved.
Right.
Okay, a couple other questions here. I think this is good to this is a good one here to talk about is opportunity cost. Have you heard that?
Oh, I have. It's been a while.
Okay, so that's important to remember. The opportunity cost is okay. We can use this lesson as an example. You you are spending time right now to listen to me, to work with me, have me help you with some econ. What could you be doing with this time instead? What's something else that it doesn't have to be good or bad, just like give me something else you might do with this time.
Um, Eat.
Eat. Okay. You could be watching TV. You could do a lot of things, right? You could just literally stare into space. But
Right.
the opportunity cost is the thing that you are giving up. Like you're giving up something to do this, and we're always doing this. We're always giving up one thing for another. Sometimes it's very minimal. Um, like if you wanted to go outside when it's raining, you're not really giving up much when it's raining. It's not, but if it's a really nice day and you end up being inside studying, the opportunity cost is the what you could have been doing outside.
Right.
Now they usually translate this into numerical problems like you have a choice. You could go work a job for 4 years and you could make, $10,000 a year, which isn't very much. Or you could go to college for 4 years and you could spend $20,000 a year on tuition. And they generate these problems where it's like, okay, one you're gaining, one is costing you something, but there's always a choice. There's always what's called a trade-off, one for another.
Right. And that would be the opportunity cost.
The opportunity cost is the thing you're giving up that you could be doing. And it doesn't always mean it's bad. It just means you're giving something up. You're just choosing how you're spending your time, how you're spending your money. But there is something, you're always giving up something.
Right. Okay.
And that's a really important, I mean, it's really a life lesson. It's like, don't think that like it doesn't matter. You are choosing, between two things, if you will. All right, let me
Right.
jump back to some other things on here that I guess we can talk about. Oh, we didn't talk about a price floor and a price ceiling. We should talk about those real quick. All right, so here's your supply and demand. And let's say I set a price floor right there. What do you think of that price floor? Is it
Isn't it a little low for price floors up top and price ceilings on the bottom?
right? So this one is not, so the choice is binding or non-binding.
Mm,
And it's like, you're right. It is not binding because you're like, I don't care. Market price is up here. Okay. Like
right.
if our hot dog example is like, this is $5 for a hot dog and the price floor is $3. Well, I mean, I'm going to charge that. The issue is when the price floor is up here, when it's above. What is the problem with that? Like, let's say market price is $5, but the price floor is $6.
Now that's binding.
Yes. And what's the problem though? Could you convey that to me in words? Like, what is the issue with having that price be above the market price?
So there we have to like produce a value where we don't really have the materials, right? Because
So,
we're producing where supply crosses the price floor, right?
well, this creates some issues, but I guess I'm just asking for a simpler, like, would you want to sell if, like, who's this good for? Is this good for the consumer or the producer? Because the consumer has to pay 6 instead of 5. So I don't think that's good for them.
And the producer has to pay 5, right?
The producer is going to sell at 6 rather than 5.
Right, that would make sense.
And we don't have to get into why, but it's good for the producer because they're getting more money than they should, but it's bad for you and I because, like, we can't pay the lower price that we should be paying.
Right. Because we only have enough for 5 and not 6.
Well, don't think about it in terms of quantity. That is the issue, like whether there's a surplus or a shortage. Try to think about it in terms of like, who's it good for, who's it not good for. And yeah, there's a shortage because there's the quantity you want to supply or surplus based on that. In this case, there's a surplus because there's just too much that's being produced. Because hey, why not? Why wouldn't you want to produce more if you can get a higher price?
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay. Now the common one you see with the price ceiling is for apartments. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
Okay, so the issue is, hey, I want to get and this is low, but here I want to get $1,000 a month for my apartment, and the price is like, no, you can only charge 800 only. And why is that bad? Or who is it good for? It's not always bad. It's good for one, it's bad for another. But who's it good for? Who's it bad for?
Who's it good for and who's it bad for is what you
Yeah,
asked, right?
yeah, exactly. Like if you wanted to rent an apartment, is this good for you?
Uh, yes.
Yes, because you don't have to pay the full price. But if you owned an apartment complex, is this bad
Well,
for
that's
you?
bad.
Yeah. So the answer is always, it depends. Like, if I could convey anything to you about this course that's more meaningful than what you're actually doing, it's like these situations are dependent on your perspective.
Right.
And we can answer questions like, yes, this is a price ceiling because it's below the equilibrium price. But is that important? Yeah, it is. But like, knowing what this, and the problem is now there's a bunch of demand. You and everybody else wants the cheaper apartment. So demand is really high, or quantity demand is high, but it's like, people aren't going to produce them. So there's going to be a shortage. And
Right.
what I'm trying to get you to see is that, like, one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing in terms of your thinking when you're working on these.
Thank you.
Okay, last 2 minutes here. Let's talk about normal versus inferior goods. Do you remember any?
I remember hearing it. I do not remember anything about it, which is a
Yeah,
bad thing.
it's bad. And then the words aren't very good. So like inferior goods are the things that, well, I guess I need to give you an example here. So an inferior good would be like tuna, and normal good would be steak. And I don't really consider steak to be normal, but they use examples like this. And the idea is tuna comes in a can, it's much cheaper. So if you're poor, if you're not doing well, you have a lot more inferior goods.
Right.
Okay. But if your income goes up, or if you're like doing a lot better in life, air quotes, you want more steak because you want the better stuff. Okay. But if your income drops, you now go back to eating tuna.
Right. Okay.
So I don't think, like to me, it's the words don't mean much, because to me the inferior good is more like what normal people eat, which
Right.
doesn't work.
So normal goods are more like luxurious items
Exactly.
and then
Exactly.
inferior goods are more like everyday things.
Yeah. Now, like they'll ask you questions, and we'll have to close with this. Um, they'll ask you things like, well, if your income drops, but you still drink the same amount of milk, what kind of a good is it? Well, milk is an inferior good because even though you think of it as a normal good, it's inferior because there's no, like, it's not like well, I shouldn't say that now. I mean, now there's so many different types of milks. But what I was thinking of is like, you just buy milk, doesn't matter how you're doing in life. You need milk for your cereal.
Right.
And whereas the normal goods, there's always sort of like a better thing to have.
Right. Like in buying milk, you could buy like a bottle of wine or whiskey or something.
Yeah. So that's, you got to be careful with like generalized, but yes, that's the idea. But um, try to think of inferior as being more of the day-to-day stuff, and normal is the premium type stuff.
Got you.
All right. Well, that does it for us for tonight. Joaquin, thank you for letting me help you these last few weeks, months. Definitely be available next semester. I'll get with mom on schedule, but I hope this exam goes well, and I hope you have a great holiday with your family and get to enjoy some time off and your new show and all that stuff.
Thank you. I hope you
Yeah.
have a great holiday and I hope to
Thank
see
you.
you next year.
Yeah. Have a great night. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you so much.